The human condition, a philosophical exploration. The concept of the human condition is one of the most profound and pervasive themes in philosophy. It refers to the characteristics, experiences, and existential realities that define what it means to be human. Philosophers, writers, and thinkers have addressed this concept from different angles, considering everything from the biological and psychological aspects of humanity to the ethical and metaphysical dilemmas of human life. The human condition, in its most expansive sense, encompasses our capacity for suffering and joy, our mortality, our need for meaning, and the social and political dimensions of our existence. In this essay, I will explore the philosophical dimensions of the human condition by examining its central themes: mortality, alienation, freedom, meaning, and ethics. Through the lens of various thinkers from different traditions, we will see how the human condition has been conceptualized and interpreted as an essential framework for understanding the complexities of human existence. 1. Mortality, the limits of human life. One of the defining features of the human condition is the awareness of mortality. The fact that human beings live finite lives bound by time and death shapes much of how we experience the world. This awareness of death has been addressed in various philosophical traditions. Existentialism and the anxiety of death. For existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger, the awareness of death is central to understanding human existence. In Being and Time, Heidegger argues that humans are beings toward death, sine sum tota, meaning that our awareness of death profoundly affects how we live. Death is not merely a future event, but something that constantly looms over us, shaping our decisions, values, and sense of urgency. Heidegger believes that coming to terms with this awareness allows individuals to live authentically, recognizing the fragility and temporality of life. Similarly, Sartre emphasizes the freedom that comes with the recognition of death. For Sartre, death highlights the absurdity of human existence, because it underscores the fact that life has no inherent meaning apart from the meaning we choose to give it. This recognition is both liberating and anxiety-inducing. On the one hand, we are free to create our own values and purposes. On the other, this freedom carries with it the burden of responsibility, as there is no external source of meaning to guide us. The classical tradition and the quest for immortality. In contrast to existentialism's focus on mortality as a source of anxiety, classical philosophers like Plato viewed death in more spiritual terms. Plato, in works like the Phaedo, argued that death is not an end, but a transition. For Plato, the human soul is immortal, and death represents the soul's liberation from the prison of the body. This idea reflects a more optimistic perspective on the human condition, one in which the limitations of human life can be transcended through the cultivation of wisdom and virtue. Both approaches, whether existential anxiety or Platonic hope, reflect the centrality of mortality in shaping the human experience. Mortality gives human life its urgency and stakes, whether it is interpreted as a limitation to overcome or a reality to accept. 2. Alienation, the feeling of disconnection. Another core element of the human condition is the experience of alienation. Alienation refers to the feeling of being estranged or disconnected from the world, others, or even oneself. This theme has been explored by philosophers in a variety of ways, particularly in relation to modernity, industrialization, and the human psyche. Karl Marx and economic alienation. One of the most influential discussions of alienation comes from Karl Marx, who viewed alienation as a byproduct of capitalist society. According to Marx, capitalism alienates individuals in several ways, from the products of their labor, from the process of work itself, from their fellow workers, and from their own human potential. In his early writings, particularly the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, Marx describes how laborers in a capitalist system become mere instruments, producing goods that they do not own or control, for purposes that are not their own. This economic alienation prevents individuals from realizing their full humanity, as they are reduced to mere cogs in a larger economic machine. Existential alienation. Existential philosophers also address the theme of alienation, but in a more individualistic and metaphysical sense. For Sartre, alienation arises from the conflict between human freedom and the deterministic structures of society. Human beings, according to Sartre, are condemned to be free, meaning that while we are radically free to make choices, we are also trapped in a world that imposes values, roles, and expectations upon us. This leads to a feeling of nausea, a profound discomfort with the meaninglessness of the world and the artificial nature of social norms. Martin Heidegger similarly speaks of alienation in terms of inauthenticity. When individuals conform to societal norms and fail to confront the reality of their own death and freedom, they live inauthentically, estranged from their true potential. Alienation, in this existential sense, is not just a social or economic phenomenon, but a fundamental condition of being human, reflecting the tension between our subjective experience and the objective world. Freedom. The burden of choice. Another key element of the human condition is the question of freedom. Human beings are distinct in their ability to make choices, but with this freedom comes a profound responsibility. Sartre and radical freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre is perhaps the most famous philosopher to emphasize the centrality of freedom in the human condition. Sartre argues that humans are condemned to be free because, unlike animals or objects, we are not defined by any essential nature. We are free to choose who we want to be, but this freedom comes with the existential burden of having no predetermined path or guidance. We must make choices in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity, and this can lead to existential dread or anguish. Freedom, for Sartre, is not something we can escape. Even in situations where external forces seem to limit our options, we still have the freedom to choose how we respond to those forces. For instance, even a prisoner in a jail cell has the freedom to choose how they will react to their imprisonment. Sartre's notion of freedom is thus closely tied to responsibility. We are responsible for our actions and the meaning we create, even when it is tempting to blame external circumstances. Kant and autonomy. In contrast to Sartre's view, Immanuel Kant also saw freedom as central to the human condition, but placed it within the context of moral duty and rationality. For Kant, freedom is the ability to act according to one's rational will, which is guided by universal moral laws. This idea of freedom is less about the existential burden of choice and more about the capacity to rise above mere inclination and instinct in order to act morally. For Kant, true freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to follow the moral law as dictated by reason. In this sense, Kantian freedom is tied to autonomy, the ability to govern oneself through rational principles, rather than external pressures or internal desires. This conception of freedom highlights the tension between the individual's capacity for self-determination and the ethical responsibilities that come with being a rational agent. 4. The search for meaning, purpose in a world of contingency. Human beings have an inherent need to find meaning and purpose in life. The question of whether life has meaning, and if so, what that meaning is, has been central to philosophical inquiry for millennia. Camus and the absurd. Albert Camus, in his philosophy of the absurd, confronts the apparent meaninglessness of life head-on. For Camus, the human condition is defined by the tension between our desire for meaning and the indifferent, chaotic universe that offers none. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus likens human life to the plight of Sisyphus, who is condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to roll back down each time he reaches the top. However, Camus famously concludes that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. In the face of the absurd, the human response is not despair, but defiance. By embracing the absurdity of life, individuals can live with dignity and passion, creating their own meaning, even in a world without inherent purpose. Camus thus presents a heroic vision of the human condition, one in which meaning is not given, but must be actively created. 5. Ethics, responsibility in a shared world. Finally, the human condition is not merely an individual experience, but a collective one. As social creatures, humans are bound by ethical responsibilities to others. How we live together, create societies, and deal with issues of justice and equality is a fundamental part of the human condition. Levinas and the ethics of the other. Emmanuel Levinas offers a distinctive approach to ethics that emphasizes the importance of the other. According to Levinas, the face-to-face encounter with another person reveals an ethical obligation that precedes all rational calculations. The mere presence of the other imposes a responsibility on the self to act ethically. This idea radically shifts the focus from individual autonomy to relational ethics, emphasizing that the human condition is one of interdependence and responsibility. Conclusion. The complexities of the human condition. The human condition is an intricate tapestry of experiences, limitations, and possibilities. From the awareness of mortality to the burden of freedom, from the search for meaning to the ethical demands of living in a shared world, philosophy offers many ways to understand what it means to be human. While different philosophical traditions emphasize different aspects of the human condition, they all agree on one point. To be human is to be engaged in a constant process of grappling with the fundamental questions of existence. It is this grappling, with all its uncertainties, that ultimately defines the richness and complexity of the human condition.